Hi, this is Evan here, Molendinarius. I want to talk to you a little bit about Latinum and what it is. The podcast, which unfortunately will cease operation on the 1st of December because the credit crunch has finally crunched it, was started in 2007. The reason why I started it was that at that time there was almost no Latin audio available. So if you wanted to learn Latin as a language and not as a computer code, or not primarily as a philologist, in other words, primarily concentrating on the grammar and the minute details of analysis, but rather you wanted to get a grip with the language and actually use it and read it fluently, then there was no audio material to listen to in vast amounts which would help you do that. Now, the only way you really can get to grips with the language is through processing enormous amounts of it. Latin, because of its system of long vowels and short vowels, really needs to be heard to get to grips with how it works. If you stand any chance of just picking up a book of Latin poetry or eventually writing your own, then you need an intuitive grasp of quantity. That's the length of the vowels. You only get that from listening. The restored classical pronunciation, which is what I use, I modeled myself in the beginning after Sonkovsky, and the other materials that are available, still available online at Sorgel, the Society for the Promotion of the Oral Recording of Latin Literature, something along those lines. And if you look for Sorgel, Sorgll, you will find a selection of recordings by academics who are attempting to model the theoretical basis for the restored classical pronunciation of Latin. Anyway, that's that. So the actual podcast contains a complete Latin course. It took me 2 years to record it, working pretty much every day. And that is now available on 3 DVDs. It comprises several hundred hours of material. I modeled the way I speak on that course after English courses for second language speakers. In other words, it's very slow, very meticulous, and it sounds very stilted. But if you are a complete beginner, this is fine. Later on, as you become more fluent, well, the way I read changes as I move on through the material I've produced. Also, you'll find on DVD Corderius's Colloquia, Comenius's Orbis Sensualium Pictus. These are very useful texts for building up vocabulary, building up the core of the language so that you can command it. And the goal here is command of the language. Now, we're aiming for a situation where you don't need to open a dictionary to read a Latin text. It will take time, but you simply need to listen to a large amount of Latin. You can study the rules, but when you're processing language in real time, you don't really have time to think about rules most of the time. You just have to know it. And to get to just know it, well, you need to listen to a large amount of Latin. And then you'll find that you're reading without analyzing. If you are only processing very small amounts of text, as is usually the case, then you have to adopt a very analytical decoding approach to Latin. And indeed, you never will command the language. You will always be translating out of Latin into your own language to understand the Latin. This is not what I'm talking about, and this is not what Latinum is aiming at. Latinum is aiming at a situation where you are able to, some degree, think in Latin, process in Latin, and not translate as you go along. There's a large amount of material on YouTube, but the YouTube material probably isn't as brilliant for learning because you need this enormous amount of repetition. You will find that on the Adler course, which you can find Latinum store.blogspot.com, or just Google for Latinum Store, or click on the link here on Evan 1965 on YouTube. You'll see, if you on the main YouTube channel page, that there is a link to the MP3 DVDs. These are very cheap. I think they're probably the cheapest Latin material available. The reason why I've made it cheap is that I've produced rather a lot of material, and in order to command the language you need to have an enormous amount of input, and you need to listen to a lot of Latin, and I don't want to make it too expensive to do that. But I do need to cover my costs because I'm running Scholar, and Scholar is reasonably expensive to run because I have to pay for the hosting of it. The internet has changed rather dramatically in the last 2 or 3 years because of the credit crunch, and sites like Scholar are no longer able to provide their service free of charge. And the same goes with pretty much everything else. So the money from the sale of DVDs is used to support Scholar and pay the rent, so to speak, for the digital real estate. Scholar is a unique community that you can communicate with others in Latin, either through a text chat room or a video chat room, or by posting, reading others' posts, etc. And the goal here is to make a location where people can express themselves in Latin without having to worry too much about grammar. The primary goal is communication. My view is that if you read enough Latin, then the grammar will look after itself eventually. Yes, you may make mistakes in producing Latin, but to be brutally honest, it really makes no difference nowadays if you write bad Latin. What's crucially important is that you are able to read it and understand it. It would be nice if you could produce perfect Latin at the drop of a hat. Most of us can't. Those of us who speak Latin, well, we make a lot of mistakes. But the point is that we're training our brains to process the language in real time, meaning that we are then able to read texts. Your ability to read text will always be ahead of your other skills, your skill in writing, your skill in conversation, and your skill in comprehending spoken speech. But there's a very close connection between spoken speech and reading. And the spoken aspect of a language, understanding spoken language, is primary in terms of the history of humankind. Well, speaking and understanding spoken language came first, and our brains evolutionary are far better equipped for that aspect of language than language as written text on a page, which is secondary. So my view is that the learning experience of a language should access those things that are primary in our brains, which is language as oral and oral. And that's what Latinum is all about. I do intend eventually in the Latin course, and that's the YouTube Latin course. But time gets in the way. But I do try to do a little bit all the time, and every now and then the software I'm using throws up surprises, and then that messes things up too. But I persevere, and so we have it. That's all. I hope you enjoy using the materials on Latinum. Do have a look at the selection of materials on offer on the Latinum store. You'll be surprised at the range of material available, and you will find that if you listen to enormous amounts of Latin on a daily basis, your skill in the language will improve dramatically and rapidly. Vale.